Good morning, Year 10, and welcome to the next instalment of Mr. MALTBY'S Home Learning Series. This video is going to act as kind of a supplementary resource for the topics you've been doing in the last couple of weeks. So looking at both communities, which is the initial kind of topic of ecology, and abiotic and biotic factors, which we're going to go through. So this is a supplementary resource just to go through and to support the learning that you've done over the last couple of weeks. I thought I'd chuck in a nice little picture of some cute dogs there, if that's going to lift your spirits. Hope it does. We're going to get stuck into some questions just to start off with, some kind of knowledge check questions. So we'll go to the next slide and we'll see how we're doing with these kind of start off questions. Okay, so we've got a set of questions here for you to have a go at. At this point, just have a go. These are kind of focusing on the key terms over the last couple of weeks. Have a go at sort of defining the key terms and having a go at these questions and kind of rate where you are. So you don't necessarily have to write the answers down. You can say them out verbally to someone in your household, but kind of rate how confident you are in terms of the answers to these questions. And we'll be going through them as we progress through this video. So at this point, you can pause the video, have a go at the questions, and see how confident you are. Now, in order to understand how organisms interact within an ecosystem, a habitat, and how communities, populations within a community interact and interdepend with each other, we need to understand what animals and plants need to survive. Okay, so pause the video at this point, see if you can recall any of the key things that animals and plants need in order to survive. So here we go. Animals need, of course, food, water, shelter, and space. Broadly, those four factors that animals need in order to survive. And plants light, carbon dioxide, water, and nutrients. And we'll be coming back to these ideas and picking them apart and thinking about how these affect the kind of distribution of living organisms through the next couple of weeks. As we go through some of the keywords, all about ecosystems, we need to write down the definitions. Okay, so we did this as part of the learning last week and this week. So this can kind of supplement that. You can check your definitions, you can check your understanding of definitions, and do a bit of checking of your work that was set. So we'll go through some of the key terms that we've kind of introduced at the beginning of this new ecology topic. So all the organisms and the environment in which they live form the ecosystem. And ecosystems can be enormous, ecosystems can be much smaller, and within those ecosystems there will be different habitats as well, which we'll explore as well. Groups of the same species of animals form populations within the ecosystem. So here we have a population of penguins, really cute penguins. All the populations of organisms that live and interact in an ecosystem form a community. Okay, so when we have different populations of organisms interacting in the same ecosystem, the same habitat, we call that a community. We've got a lovely image here to represent that. Each population lives in a particular habitat within the ecosystem, and we'll explore that a bit further as we go through this supporting video. So, what is an ecosystem? An ecosystem is a community of living organisms, plants and animals, of course, sharing an environment. The largest ecosystems are called biomes, and a biome is a very large ecosystem, such as a tropical rainforest. And within that tropical rainforest, there will be different, smaller habitats within that. The animals and plants within the ecosystem all interact with each other and depend on each other for resources. We call this interdependence. Okay, we know from the work that we've done in the last couple of weeks that communities that are stable, okay, rely on each other. A stable community, the organisms will interact with each other and rely on each other. And a stable community, if one of those organisms is removed, a stable community will be able to recover from that. And the more diverse an ecosystem is, the more different species of organisms it has within the ecosystem, the more stable it is. Okay, that's an interesting idea to kind of bring these key terms together. So in terms of our key definitions, ecosystems are all the organisms and the environment in which they live. The population is a group of the same species that live and interact in a particular area. And community are all the different organisms that live in a particular area. So we'll have a population of the same species, and if we have several populations of different species interacting together, we call that a community that then, of course, live in a habitat. And the habitat is an area in which an organism or population lives, and that habitat will be within a larger surrounding ecosystem. Organism independent when two organisms are dependent upon each other and they rely on each other, and we can link this to the idea of kind of food chains and things like that. So, ecosystems, thinking that more broadly, how many ecosystems can you name from these pictures? Pause the video, have a go. Here are a few: tropical rainforests, deciduous forests, coniferous forests, savanna, grassland, desert and tundra, all having specific conditions, okay, which is linking to what we'll be talking about later on. Biotic and abiotic factors, different conditions that are in that particular ecosystem. And of course, within those ecosystems, we have specific habitats, and because of the demands of those ecosystems, there will be different organisms that are able to survive and thrive within those habitats. So again, the ecosystem, the animals and plants within an ecosystem all interact with each other, and we call that interdependence. Our world contains many different ecosystems. How many can you think of? Let's try and think of some more examples. Pause the video, have a go. Of course, there are lots: forests, rivers, mountains, coastals, desert, plains, very, very different, all very diverse, all with their various demands and different conditions, allowing different animals to survive and reproduce. Now, what we can do now is start to think about these ecosystems in a bit more detail. And think about, well, what's the difference between a habitat and an ecosystem? Habitat is within the ecosystem. So if we look at this forest, for example, we have the habitat of the tree canopy where birds live. We have the forest floor where lots of detritivores will live, and microorganisms. We have the trees, the soil, moss, bed itself would be a habitat for various smaller organisms. So all the organisms living in the forest make up the forest community, and they all live in their different habitats within that larger ecosystem. So again, we're trying to use examples here to kind of bring these key terms together and put them into context. If we take our ecosystem of mountain, for example, okay, we have the mountains, woodlands is a habitat, but also the high grassland is a habitat as well. Each with their different demands, each therefore with different organisms that make up the community within that ecosystem. Okay, I'd like you to pause the video now and you can have a go at this task. Have a look at the picture. Which ecosystems can you see? Can you identify some of the habitats? Can you suggest some organisms you would find in the community? And for each habitat, suggest potential organisms that could make up a community in the habitat. Now, this is an optional task. If you'd like to pause the video and have a go at that, that would be great. Okay, another optional task for you guys. Again, supporting this learning today, trying to bring the key terms together. Have a go at sketching a diagram to show the relationship between the terms population, community, and ecosystem. You could use one of the examples that we've looked at earlier in this video, and add an example of each to your diagram. A challenge then would be to think about what environmental factors would affect the ecosystem you have chosen, and this links to our next aspect we're going to be looking at, which is abiotic and biotic factors. So, if you'd like to have a go at this optional task, pause the video and have a go. Now, I'm going to use the example of a pond as an example, and we can start to think about how these key terms kind of link together. We start by thinking about the different populations of the species that live, both animal and plant. We've got our lilies and some goldfish. Simple, yeah. That, along with the other organisms, other plants, other animals, such as frogs, snails, those other populations all interact with one another. They are interdependent in that community. Okay, community is all the living organisms within that habitat. As we go wider, we can then think about how this fits into the ecosystem. The ecosystem is the community of the organisms and the environment together. So a nice diagram there to kind of bring these key terms together. and you can do your own example in that previous optional task should you wish. So just to kind of check our progress here, think about the key ideas. What resources do both animals and plants need? Can we recall that? How are populations and communities linked? List some factors that make up an ecosystem and choose 2 organisms, describe and explain why their habitats are different. So at this point you can pause the video, just have a discussion maybe with someone in your household and think about these key questions and just check your understanding. Okay, so just kind of thinking about our key terms, how we go at matching these together for the key terms that we've looked at so far. Now, on to abiotic and biotic factors. This is the stuff that we're covering this week, and by now you would have done the kind of pre-reading. You would have also created a table listing the abiotic and biotic factors and done some notes and some drawing as well. So again, this is kind of just to supplement your learning, and we'll kick off with some key knowledge questions just to see how see where we're at. So at this point you can pause the video, just read through the questions, see if you can link this to the work that you've done this week, and just kind of rate again how confident you are with each of these questions, and we'll come back to them towards the end of the video. So abiotic factors. Now we can broadly sort of think about these factors that affect the distribution of living organisms into 2 kind of key groups, abiotic and biotic factors. We know that if we break this term down, bio means living. If we are biologists, we are studying living things. Abiotic then means non-living, and biotic means living. So abiotic factors are the non-living parts of the environment that can have these kind of influences on the distribution of the living organisms. Those factors that we refer to are light intensity, temperature, moisture levels, soil pH and mineral content, wind intensity and direction, carbon dioxide levels and oxygen levels as well. So what we need to be able to do is understand and appreciate these as abiotic factors and understand how they can impact on the growth and development of animals and plants, and therefore the distribution of those numbers of populations of animals and plants within a ecosystem. Our biotic factors then, the living factors, are the availability of food, new predators arriving, new pathogens, or if a species can outcompete another. A good example of competition or inter-specific competition is the squirrel example. When grey squirrels were introduced to the UK, they outcompeted our red squirrel, putting those in endangered numbers. So we're going to look at these again individually and think about some examples as well. So again, this video is kind of supporting the work that you've done this week. A couple of review questions, so you can pause this video now and have a go at these review questions. Kind of think where your learning is at in terms of abiotic and biotic factors. The work you would have done this week would have brought these ideas together, so you can check your understanding here. If you've got any questions or queries about the work that we've set this week, please do get onto the Teams chat and we can have a discussion on there. So key questions here, fundamental questions that we're going to come back to at the end. So first of all, let's go through light. So light we know is fundamental for plants. We think about plants as an example. Plants will need to use that light energy in photosynthesis to create their own food. And we should be able to recall then our equation for photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide plus water using light energy to produce glucose and oxygen, and we know how important light is for the growth of plants. We can measure light intensity, and we can look at that as an abiotic factor to affect the distribution of living organisms, something that we'll revisit in our next lesson when we look at measuring the distribution of organisms in an environment. Temperature, of course, super important for our biological processes, and of course any chemical reaction that is regulated by enzymes. We know we've looked at the effect of temperature on the rate of photosynthesis and how we have an optimum temperature of approximately 37 degrees, and beyond that enzymes will begin to denature, and therefore affect those chemical reactions. Okay, and we can relate that back to some previous learning about photosynthesis. We know the temperature is super important. We know that animals and plants are adapted to live in different temperatures, and that we should be aware of as well. Water, super important. If we think about on a kind of cellular level, if you think about animal and plant cells, the cytoplasm is made predominantly of water, and that allows for various chemical reactions, metabolic reactions to happen within the cytoplasm. So without water, we can't have cytoplasm. Without cytoplasm, it's going to affect those chemical reactions. So water is vital for all living organisms for those metabolic reactions. Soil, in terms of the mineral content and pH, we know that particular plants are adapted to live in various conditions, and we know that acidic or alkali conditions, we know that pH can affect enzyme-controlled reactions. Various enzymes prefer different pH levels. We can also think about the mineral content, and of course plants need minerals. Some plants are better adapted to survive in more harsh conditions. For example, halophytes or halophytic plants, they particularly are well adapted to living in very salty conditions. Okay, so that's an interesting example. Moving on to wind intensity and direction, we can think about how wind intensity can affect plants in terms of the transpiration stream. Of course, wind can affect pollination levels. In fact, plants rely on wind, don't they, to distribute their seeds and increase the chance of survival. So some plants have adaptations to survive the wind. So we can have sunken stomata, needle-like leaves, thick waxy cuticles. And I want you to pause the video now and think about how those adaptations would affect the transpiration stream. Okay, so just kind of extending this a little bit further. So pause the video, have a think. Okay, so all of these kind of examples of adaptations are going to reduce water loss, okay, which is, for various conditions is going to be important. Okay, sunken stomata, needle-like leaves, thick waxy cuticles is going to reduce water loss, which is important for the plants. Atmospheric oxygen and carbon dioxide. Of course, gases like oxygen, nitrogen and carbon dioxide, all organisms require oxygen for respiration. And we can't forget the kind of misconception we often get here that it is only animals that carry out respiration. Of course, plants also carry out respiration. Respiration is just the breaking down of glucose to release energy, and that can then be used for various other processes which we have looked at. Carbon dioxide is used by green plants, of course, in photosynthesis, and we need to understand how those kind of link together. Okay, so at this point we're going to go back to our kind of key questions. I want you to have another think about these questions. Which ones are you finding that you're really confident with? Which ones are you not so confident with? And just have a pause here to kind of recap and have a think about these key questions around communities. So again, with our work on abiotic and biotic factors, pause the video, think about these questions. You don't need to write the answers down necessarily, but you can discuss them in your house or with your dog perhaps, and think about how confident you are with these questions. Once you've done that, pause the video. You can go back through the video, have a look at the work you've done in your book over the last couple of weeks. And I just want you to think, have I got any burning questions that I'd like to ask Mr. Maltby? Okay, if there's anything we're not too sure about the last couple of lessons, please do get in contact, and you can contact me on Teams. We can have a group discussion on Teams, or you can use the chat function as well just to talk to me directly. That's absolutely fine. Okay, thanks very much, Year 10. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe, and we'll speak to you soon.